What's up, y'all? I'm going to try to cover everything you might need to know about speedrunning in OpenGOAL. Sorry if my voice sounds a little bit weird. I'm just getting over COVID last week, so bear with me on that. Today we're going to talk about installing / setting up OpenGOAL a little bit. We're going to talk about how to get the best performance out of it, especially when you're recording with OBS. We'll talk about using the Autosplitter. We'll talk about using Debug Mode, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the practice tools that we built for learning how to run the games. I'm going to probably cover most of this in Jack 1. In a couple places I'll jump to Jack 2 and 3 because there's a little bit of differences there, but most of what I talk about should hold true for all 3 games. So let's start with installation and setup. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here. The OpenGOAL website has an installation guide. If you go to documentation and then installation, there's really detailed steps here that walk you through exactly what to do. There's also a video here if you prefer a video to follow along. A couple things that I will call out, just common errors that we see all the time. First one is you may see something like executable doesn't exist or couldn't find file, and it's usually talking about either extractor.exe or gk.exe. Typically what happens here is Windows Defender or some other antivirus has quarantined these files because it doesn't recognize them, and all you really need to do is go into Windows Defender. If you look at protection history, you would see an item here that says gk.exe was quarantined or something, and there should be an option to basically just like allow it and restore the file. So that's one issue we often see. Another issue that people will do sometimes is install in OneDrive. It causes problems with OpenGOAL trying to stream cutscenes from files and different things like that. So don't install in OneDrive. It's a bad idea. You're not going to have a good time. Another error we see a lot is ISO contents don't match. So what happens here typically is when you rip the ISO from your disk, you used a higher drive speed, and it doesn't quite get a full quality rip from the disk. Contents of the ISO don't match what we're expecting to see on the OpenGOAL side, and this can lead to issues with like cutscenes not playing or something like that. So we have it built into the launcher to enforce that the files have to match what we expect them to. We do like a hash on the files. So if you run into this error, I recommend going to this PCSX2 guide. And there's some details in here about bad dumps and how to get a better quality dump from your ISO. The one in particular that I've recommended to a lot of people and it seems to work is using lower drive speeds. It'll take longer to rip the ISO from the disk, but you'll get a better quality rip and hopefully have a matching ISO and not have issues installing. One other issue that people will have in various ways is that their controller doesn't work. The only really advice I have for this is if you have Steam running, try closing Steam and make sure it's fully closed, not just like minimized into the background. If you don't have Steam running, try opening Steam. Sometimes Steam, it has its own like input layer and remaps controllers. Sometimes that helps or sometimes that hurts controllers and their compatibility with OpenGOAL. You can also try using some tools for DualShock controllers. There's DS4 Windows, and there's also DSHID Mini, I believe are the two that I've used. You may have some luck with those as well. Let's also talk about installing mods real quick. So this is just one source for mods that I happen to kind of help maintain. You're welcome to install other mod sources, of course, but I'm going to show you how to install our mod source, and this has the practice mod and a couple other things that we'll talk about later on in this video. So just go to jackmods.dev, and you just want to click this button. It's going to copy jackmods.dev/mods.json to your clipboard. And then in the OpenGOAL launcher, you want to go to the settings cog here, go to the mods tab, paste in that jackmods.dev/mods.json, and click add. I've already added it, so it's not going to let me do it again. Once you've done that, if you go back to any of the Jack 1, 2, 3 pages and go to features, mods, you should see a list of mods here. They'll start out under this like available mods section, and then once you've installed them, they'll show up here in the top under installed. And you can just click on one of these, and this is like a dedicated page for that mod. You can install different versions. You can, do all the same things you'd be able to do with the normal game here. Some mods are only available under Jack 1. Some are only available under Jack 2, Jack 3, etc. One other thing I want to talk about in terms of getting set up for speedrunning is Speedrunner Mode. So let's go ahead and launch the game here. So first, let's make sure Speedrunner Mode is turned on. You can do this either from the main menu or when you're in a game. You want to go to Options, Game Options, go down to the bottom here to Miscellaneous, and then there will be an option Speedrunner Mode, and you just want to make sure that's turned on. This does a few different things. In Jack 1, it makes sure that play hints is turned off so that you don't get the little cutscenes for teaching you what precursor orbs are and stuff like that. It skips the intro cutscene in all 3 games. It locks frame rate to 60 FPS. This is because at higher FPSs, there are some like physics bugs and different things that don't behave quite right. And so to keep things fair, we require 60 FPS for speedruns, at least for submitting to the leaderboards. It also makes the Autosplitter work. If you don't have Speedrunner Mode on, the Autosplitter won't work. We'll talk a little bit more about the Autosplitter later. And the last thing it does is adds this verification text to the bottom corner of your screen. Oh, this verification text that you see here in the bottom left. I think it's in the bottom right in Jack 2 and 3. We use this for verifying runs just so that we know, what version you're on, make sure the category is set up correctly, and sometimes there's a little bit of other information. But the key thing is this needs to be displayed in your run. So make sure when you're recording your video, however your layout is set up, you don't cover up this text if you plan to submit to the leaderboards. We have had to reject some runs when this text was covered up and we couldn't see what version it was. We couldn't verify what category it was. One other thing that the Speedrunner Mode gives you is the Speedrun Options menu. So if you hold L1, R1, and then you press either Start or Select, this menu will come up. And this is just a quick way to be able to reset your run, change categories, that sort of thing. So this first option, Reset Run, no matter where you are, it'll just reset you back to the start of the game. New full game run is if you're on another category, you want to switch back to a full game run, you can choose this. Individual level runs, so if you wanted to do a Sentinel Beach run, you can choose that. And then do a Sentinel Beach run. And now if you reset current run, it'll reset a beach run. You'll see in the bottom left corner, it says category beach. There's also some category extensions. So New Game Plus, this is a category brought over from the console leaderboards where you have almost all of the power cells in the game. You basically just make a beeline for Citadel. You do Citadel skip and warp to the top of the Citadel and beat the final boss. And there's some other categories like NG Plus All Flies where you collect all the flies throughout the game while making your way to the boss. We also have Hub 1, Hub 2, Hub 3, 100% categories, and all cutscenes, which is a special one that will make sure that the intro cutscene is not skipped, because that is a required cutscene to watch all cutscenes. I think that's about it for the Jack 1 speedrun menu. Let me switch over to Jack 2. Okay, so here in Jack 2, before we jump into this, I'm just going to show same thing. Options, game options, at the bottom, miscellaneous, and you want to turn Speedrunner Mode on. One other thing that's added in Jack 2 and 3 are some of these fast options, fast airlocks, fast elevators, fast progress menu. You're allowed to have all of these on in speedruns, and it's probably advantageous for you to do so. So you may want to toggle those on here. You can already see in the bottom right the verification text. So now let's start a new game. Cool, and then same button combo here, L1, R1, and either start or select, and you get the speedrun menu here. Similar options, you can quickly reset. You can choose normal or hero mode and reset. Now you'll see hero mode, I have the guns. There's also a way to build custom categories. So if you go to tools, you can toggle different features on, different secrets, different features, different cheats. You can choose what tasks, what missions are already completed, and you can save that as a category and then choose it here and start a run that way if you so choose. Yeah, same thing exists in Jack 3. I think that about wraps up installation and setup. Let's talk about performance now. So there's a couple things we can do before launching the game to try to ensure that it's going to run smoothly. The first one is we can make sure that it's set to use our GPU on performance mode rather than like power saving mode. So if you go to settings here and just make note of your installation directory, and then in the start menu you can type graphics and open up the graphics settings, and then you just want to add desktop app here. And I've already navigated to my folder. You want to navigate to this folder, go into versions, official, and then choose the version, the latest version that you have installed, the one that you're running. In my case, it's 0.3.1. And then you want to select GK here. GK is goal kernel. This is the game. This is the game. This is the executable that runs for Jack 1, 2, and 3. So just double click that and then scroll down and find it in the list. And then on GPU preference, just make sure it's set to high performance. And that should be it. That'll make sure that it doesn't run in power saving mode and perform poorly. So another thing that can affect performance is OBS itself, the recording software. One thing I recommend when you're capturing a window from OpenGOAL is to use game capture rather than window capture. Game capture just seems to have a better hook and runs a little bit more smoothly for capturing gameplay. In general, OBS and OpenGOAL don't always play along very well, so you may have to tweak some of your OpenGOAL recording settings and try to see what works best. The only other thing I would really recommend is just disabling the preview in OBS rather. That seems to help my performance a little bit, but that's just sort of anecdotal. Something else I want to mention here is if you're streaming OpenGOAL through Discord, through a voice call or something, personally I have a lot of trouble using Discord's built-in streaming software for that. So what I like to do instead is I open OBS and I start virtual camera and I have that capturing OpenGOAL, and then in Discord it shows up as a webcam, but it's the virtual camera, and I share that in my voice calls instead, and I seem to get better performance with that. I don't have issues doing it that way. Okay, now let's boot up the game and we'll go through some of the in-game options that can affect performance. Now, I'm going to caveat here, it seems like everybody has different results with some of these different settings. So I'm going to talk about some of the things you can change. I can't guarantee which one's going to work best for you. You're going to have to do some trial and error here. I can tell you what I use personally that I found, seems to work pretty well in terms of performance. But yeah, let's get into it. So if you go into options and go to graphic options, first thing I want to talk about is display mode. Obviously windowed versus one of the full screen options is a little bit personal preference. Whether or not you have multiple monitors makes a difference as well, of course. So for me, I have 2 monitors, so I'll use borderless on one monitor, and then I have my splits and OBS running on the second monitor. Other people will do windowed and just kind of have everything in one window. If you're playing on a laptop or something, that may be a better option for you so you can see your splits. Personally, I have a lot of trouble with full screen, exclusive full screen. You have to have like focus into OpenGOAL, otherwise you just get a black screen or it just minimizes to desktop. And I seem to have bad performance when OpenGOAL has focus in exclusive full screen mode. So yeah, again, this is all just sort of like anecdotal, but for me, I like to use borderless, and I like to actually make sure that OpenGOAL doesn't have focus. If I'm in borderless and I give the OpenGOAL window focus, I seem to get a little bit of poor performance. So I'll typically like put it in borderless and then click off into OBS or something. VSync, this will depend a little bit on your monitor. This is just another one of those settings that I would recommend trying both ways and see what works best for you. I think if you're in borderless mode, it's going to force it off. I think you may only be able to turn it on in windowed and exclusive full screen. Don't quote me on that though. Aspect ratio, couple things here. Don't use the PS2 options. PS2 16:9 crops the window, so you actually can't see quite as much, and just don't use it. Use a normal 16:9 if you're going to use 16:9. It doesn't really make a difference for speedruns, at least at this point in time. There's no like clear advantage over one or the other. You might be able to see a little bit further around you on 16:9. But in general, this isn't something that we have strong requirements about. You can set ridiculous aspect ratios if you open up your file directly. Just don't get too crazy with it. We've rejected runs that were like, 1000 by 10 ratio or something like that. That's not a good ratio, but you get the idea. Don't do crazy ratios, but otherwise it doesn't really matter too much in terms of getting your run verified. MSAA, if you're having trouble with performance, you might want to turn this off. It does take a little, it's a little more resource intensive if you have this turned up all the way. I typically play with this at 2x. Again, one of those things that you can just play around with and see how it works for you. Frame rate, this is going to be locked at 60 FPS when you're in speedrun mode, so nothing to really worry about here. Under PS2 options, there is one option I want to talk about, particle culling. So the particle effects can be a little bit CPU intensive, and if you're having poor performance, this is another one of those settings that might be worth turning on. So particle culling on means if the particles are too far or out of view of the camera, they won't be rendered. They won't, the computer won't spend time processing them. I typically turn this on just because I don't really care that much about having a bajillion particles on my screen, and I'd rather have better performance than, you know, every single particle possible. I think that's it in terms of graphics settings. Let's talk a little bit about input options as well. Under camera options, you can change if you want inverted camera. It's pretty straightforward. You can turn keyboard on, and at this point in time, we don't have any ruling that says you can't switch between keyboard and controller throughout the run. So that is an option if you so choose. If you want to change the bindings for your controller or keyboard, you can do that here. Under controller options, here's where you can turn vibrations on and off. Analog dead zone, 0.3 is the default. I usually like to put this just at the edge of 0.2. In particular for Jack 1, I find this is a good dead zone for my controller where I can slow walk and get boosted pretty comfortably, and I don't get too much like whiplash or stick drift or anything like that. Analog sensitivity, this is basically a way to scale how far the stick inputs are read in terms of like getting into the corners of all the possible inputs, you know, max X, max Y, min X, min Y. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well. 133 is the default. This is what PCSX2 uses as well, and this helps most controllers be able to reach those min-max values in all the corners of the controller. I know a lot of people have had issues with that, especially in Jack 2 and 3 with their hovers on the jetboard. If you drop it back down to 100, this is what I typically like to play at in Jack 2 and 3 as well. I do find it makes my hovers a little bit more consistent. Again, another setting that you should play around with and see what works best for you. Okay, I think that's about it for controller settings. Let's switch gears and talk about the Autosplitter a little bit. So in Live Split, if you right click and edit splits, you want to choose OpenGOAL Jack 1, 2, or 3 in the drop down here under game name. And then there should be an option here to go ahead and activate the Autosplitter. As it says here, you need to make sure you have Speedrunner Mode enabled. If Speedrunner Mode is not enabled, the Autosplitter is not going to work, so keep that in mind. You want to activate the Autosplitter, and then you want to go into settings as well and just make sure that it's set up to split where you're expecting it to. So you can probably minimize all orbs and scout flies. There's more options there. If you want to split on individual, like getting all the orbs in a level or splitting on individual scout flies, you can do that as well. But most people I think are going to be splitting on power cells. By default, I believe it has all these checked. By the way, if you want to uncheck a whole branch, like all power cells, you can uncheck and check from the right click menu. So like if I wanted to uncheck geyser, I can do that. The power cell splits are a little bit different than how people typically split on console. On console, people would usually split the moment the power cell like enters Jack's hand during the cutscene. On OpenGOAL, they're going to split as soon as you touch the power cell. So just keep that in mind. It's not exactly one-to-one with how console works. In addition to power cells, there's a few other non-cell tasks that you may want to turn on, like talking to fishermen, catching the mews, herding the moles into their hole, that sort of thing. There's also a final task option here that you almost definitely want, which is to collect the light eco. This is going to end the splits. So if for some reason you have like 5 splits remaining and you have this option checked, it's going to make sure everything splits all the way to the bottom. Now, certain categories like all flies, low collectibles, you may want to collect light eco, skip the credits, and then go do other things before you finish the run. So that's what this option is here, the single split option. This won't split all the way to the bottom, it just does a single split when you collect the light eco. There's also an option here for custom levels where it'll just split anytime it sees the power cell counter increase, it's going to split. That's what this option is. So yeah, for most runs, you probably just want to check all the power cells and then maybe some of the non-cell tasks, and you probably want this final task checked. Just make sure you hit OK there, hit OK here. And now let's see it in action. If we start a new run. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention actually, let's go back and edit splits. You'll notice the splits haven't started yet. They're set up to start the moment Jack hits the ground and the black screen has gone away. So if you're doing like an IL run, you may not come out of the warp gate, you'll start on the ground. And so in those cases, it's going to start the auto splitter the moment it comes out of the blackout screen. For the normal runs, you're coming out of the warp gate, it's going to start the moment Jack hits the ground. So because of this, the start timer here, you should be able to just leave it at 0. You shouldn't need to do an offset here. On old versions of OpenGOAL, this was a little bit different and you did need a negative offset here. But in the modern version of OpenGOAL, you should be able to leave this at 0 and you'll be good to go. So watch here. So he still hasn't touched the ground. I think he's going to do it on the next frame and the auto splitter should start. Yeah, there you go. And now if I go collect a power cell, it splits. I think that's pretty much all there is to talk about with the auto splitter. I'll just open up Jack 3 splits as well. Well, let's start with Jack 2. So same thing here, choose Jack 2, OpenGOAL Jack 2 in the dropdown, activate, and if you go to settings, instead of power cells, that splits when missions are completed. And again, this may not match exactly where people typically split on console. This is where internally the game considers missions completed is where it'll split. So there's a category here for any percent. There's another one for all missions. There's one for 100%. Or if you want to manually craft your splits, there's another one that just lists every single possible option. So most likely for Jack 2, you just want to go ahead and like right click and check the whole any percent branch. There's maybe a couple that you want to uncheck if you're, depending on how you want things to split. One thing you probably also want to check is the ending condition, core death. That's similar to collecting light eco in Jack 1. Okay, let's take a quick look at the Jack 3 one as well. It should look pretty similar to Jack 2. We just have a few more categories, I think. So again, OpenGOAL Jack 3 is the game, activate, go into settings. You have ending conditions here, so you probably want arrow death checked. And then depending on which category you run, you may want different splits for the missions that you're going to complete. So in this case, this was any percent node restricted. So I'd probably want to right click this and just check this whole branch. I would recommend keeping an eye on this and seeing where it's actually splitting. There may be places that you do or don't want to split. Like for instance, this one splits when you talk to the burning bush, the side mission. I don't think people always split here. It was something I added because I found it useful, so you may want to uncheck that. But yeah, totally up to you how you want to use this. I think that about covers auto splitter. Now let's talk about debug mode. So first thing I want to clarify, on console, there's a button combo you can enter, and people will often refer to this as debug mode. Technically in the code, they call that cheat mode. And cheat mode has limited options in terms of what you can do. You can like free cam, you can spawn Jack in and out. You can do some things with the second controller inputs as well. I'm going to focus on the true debug mode, not the cheat mode, because it's a little bit more powerful and it's frankly just easier to get to in OpenGOAL. So there's two ways to access this. You can either press left alt, and in this top bar that pops up here, which just hides and shows when you press left alt, you can go to debugging, reboot in debug mode. The other way to boot into debug mode in the launcher here is if you just go to advanced, there's a play in debug mode option. And this will also launch you in debug mode. So you'll notice in debug mode, we skip the title screen and we spawn right here in front of Samos's hut. This is pretty nice if you're just trying to test things out. You don't want to have to sit through the title screen and load into a game and all that. The big feature with debug mode is the debug menu. So in Jack 1, you just press R3 to get in and out of this. In Jack 2 and 3, you want to hold L3 and press start, and that'll bring up a similar menu for Jack 2 and 3. One thing that people would often use cheat mode on console for is to free cam. So I'll quickly show the equivalent here, is you want to just turn target off. Target is Jack. So if you turn target off, you're now in free cam mode, and you can fly around like this. And if you just turn target back on, Jack will spawn. Now right now, you'll notice it switched from game mode to debug mode. Jack can't die when he's in debug mode, and there's a couple other things that behave weirdly. So if you're trying to test like how things would behave in a normal run, you want to make sure you switch this back to game mode after you spawn target. Anytime you despawn and respawn target, it's gonna switch to debug mode. So just kind of get in the habit, I would say, of switching this back to game mode when you spawn target. One other thing I'll mention, because it's just like kind of a quicker way to get to this option of target spawning and despawning. If you hold, thanks Kira, if you hold L3 and then press R3, you get this sort of like mini debug menu, and you can also turn target on and off here, and you can switch back to game mode like that as well. I like to use that just because in this menu it's like one layer deeper, but it's totally this. It does the same thing under the hood. A couple other things I want to show off here in the debug menu that can be useful. First, I guess let me tell you how to navigate the menu. So X obviously gets you forward in options, and if you press square, it'll go back in options. Use the D-pad to navigate it, and you can press left and right to skip, like, I think it's 5 options at a time. So one that's really useful under game continue, you can jump to any checkpoint in the game very quickly. So that's really useful, just getting around the world to test different scenarios or practice different levels. A couple other options that are useful in the debug menu. If you go down to display and turn on level border, you'll see this text in the top left. Now, you want to pay attention to this want line, jungle and village 1. Those are the 2 levels. Jack 1 has 2 level slots. So those are the 2 levels that are being considered right now, I would say. Jungle, which is Forbidden Jungle, and Village 1, which is Sandover Village. And you'll see Village 1 is in display mode because obviously it's being displayed right now. Jungle is loaded, but it's not displayed, and the F there is for false, which is like, you know, off or you know, whatever. As we get closer to jungle, it'll turn the display on for jungle. Yeah, so now you'll see it's in display no wait mode. And as you get even closer, it goes to normal display mode. So that's what the want line is. The other line below it, this shows Nick, which is your the Nick and Kerr. It's a little bit complicated, but this is basically the level that the game considers you in at the moment. So right now I'm still in Village 1. If I actually go a little bit further, you'll see it switch to jungle, I think right about here. Yeah. And then if I go back this way, it should switch back to Village 1. So that's what Nick and Kerr are. And then cont here is continue. This is your checkpoint. So right now I have the Village 1 hut checkpoint, and the one outside Samos's hut. I don't know if you noticed it before, but if I go over here, I'll get the jungle start checkpoint, which is like pretty much right where I'm standing at the moment. So that's level border. The other option that's sort of related that may be useful is load boundaries. So yeah, you'll see all these, let me hide target real quick. You'll see all these like checkerboards across the world. These are the different like triggers for either loading in levels, displaying levels, giving you checkpoints, or updating what your current level is. So you'll see as I pass through this one, it's going to change me from jungle to Village 1. And if I pass through this one, it's going to change me from Village 1 to jungle. Sometimes they work in sometimes they work from both sides, sometimes they only work from one direction, so that's something to keep in mind. Now you'll see as I get farther away from jungle, I think this trigger, it's going to undisplay jungle, right? So now jungle is back to false. And if I go, I think through here, it's going to load Fire Canyon. No, I'm sorry. What does this one do? Oh, I think this one loads jungle if you don't already have jungle loaded. This is the one that loads Fire Canyon. Yeah. So now Fire Canyon and Village 1 are loaded. If I go through here, it's going to load jungle. If I go through here, it's going to load Fire Canyon. And if I go through here, it's going to display Fire Canyon. So these are useful. You know, there's different tricks in the speedrun where you need to hit a certain checkpoint or hit a certain trigger a certain way. So this can be useful for actually seeing what those look like. Okay, let's jump over to Jack 2, and I'll show some of the sort of equivalent things in the debug menu for Jack 2. And most of what I talk about here for Jack 2 will also apply in Jack 3. No, they're very similar debug menus and systems. So just to recap, the button combo is a little bit different for the debug menu in Jack 2 and 3. You want to hold L3 and press Start to get the full debug menu. And you can hold L3 and press Select to get the mini debug menu. Target works the same way. You want to use Game the same way as well. Now within the debug menu, you navigate the same way. X goes forward, square goes backwards. Game Continue works pretty much the same way. They're nested, the continue points are nested under the levels that they live under. So here we can jump to Mars Tomb. Now if we go back and go to Display, Level Border works pretty much the same way. You have a list of the levels and whether they're displayed or not displayed and what's loaded. And it shows your current level as well as your current continue point, your current checkpoint. One thing that's a little bit different in Jack 2 and 3, Jack 1 had only 2 level slots. Jack 2 has, I believe, 6, and I think Jack 3 has up to 10. These level slots are not the same size as they were in Jack 1. Many of them are much smaller, and it lets them do things like load in side missions and things like that. But just something to keep in mind. There's more than 2 level slots in Jack 2 and 3. One thing that's a little bit different, you'll notice there's no load boundaries option here. So in Jack 1, the load boundaries are global. They're always active throughout the whole game, no matter what levels you actually have loaded. In Jack 2 and 3, it's a little bit different. They're now called regions, and you can turn on region marks here to see the sort of equivalent of load boundaries. The regions actually live within the levels, and so if the level is not loaded, the regions that relate to that level will not be active. So that's a little bit different than Jack 1, where the load boundaries were global. These regions have text that actually tells you what they do. So this one, when you enter, if this tomb boss resolution is closed, then it's going to load tomb A, B, and C. And when you exit, it does the same thing basically. Oh, it loads in D, sorry, instead of C. One thing to keep in mind with both load boundaries in Jack 1 and the regions in Jack 2, sometimes they're triggered by Jack passing through them. Sometimes they're triggered by the camera passing through them. And there's a color coding to it. I don't remember what the color coding is on hand. But something to keep in mind, you should play around with that and make sure you know which one's which for different regions. One other thing I'll mention is not all of the loading is done just through regions. Sometimes doors or airlocks will do a lot of the loading and displaying of levels as well. So let's turn off region marks. Let's go down to actor marks. And let's turn on, we'll just do processes. So you'll see there's a tomb wing door 4 here. This guy. If we go back and we go down to the entity menu, let's refresh the list. So it's going to look at all the entities and the actors that are loaded in whatever levels I have active at the moment. And we want to pick, what was the name? Tomb Wing Door 4. So once you select that, you'll notice the name changes to red. And in the top right here, there's a little bit more information. This has similar information to what regions have, where when you enter or exit them, or when the door is close enough to be noticing Jack, or when you exit and you go far away from Jack, there's different things that will happen, different actions. And these can either load levels or display levels or set checkpoints. They can kind of do anything that a region can do. So something to keep in mind, not everything is done through regions. Sometimes it's these individual actors, entities that have the code that is responsible for loading in levels and things. One other thing I want to show in the debug menu, and I should have shown this in Jack 1, but it's in the same place, so you know I don't need to go back and show it. But if you go to collision here and go down to the bottom, OpenGOAL Collision Renderer, it might just be called Collision Renderer in Jack 1. I can't remember exactly. There is this other version at the top. This is the old Naughty Dog one. It's kind of terrible to use. I wouldn't recommend it. I would use the OpenGOAL one. You just want to enable this. Probably want to turn on wireframe as well, so you can see the individual triangles that make up the collision geometry. So there's 3 main types of geometry across all 3 games. The red that you see Jack standing on is ground collision. This is where you have like stable standpoints. You can walk around without sliding. You can punch and jump and do all your stuff. The blue collision is wall collision. This is what Jack's not really meant to stand on, but he can stand on it. And he kind of enters that sliding state if he has momentum. He can get standpoints on this if he has no momentum, and then you can jump, you can punch, but he's kind of at the will of gravity and the geometry itself, you know, whether he's going to have momentum or not. The third type of collision is this pink or purple. This is obstacle collision. It's sort of like a dynamic collision between wall and ground. So you'll see right now, this triangle I'm standing on is flat enough that it acts like ground collision. If it's too steep, it'll act like wall collision. So I think like this triangle here, yeah, you'll see this one's too steep. And so it acts more like wall collision and Jack slides off. And you can do ABBA bounces on it too. There is technically a fourth type of collision. It'll show up yellow, and it's used for the jetboard quarter pipes or half pipes. It's not too important, but just wanted to call out that it does exist. This can be really useful because a lot of times the collision won't match the visuals of the level. So like here, for instance, there's big gaps where, you know, it looks like there's nothing there, but the collision actually is like a little more rounded out. Or like over here, there's this big blue invisible wall that, you know, doesn't look like it exists, and you can kind of stand up here, stand on nothing. Yeah, this is just useful for learning different tricks, you know, how to navigate where there's standpoints, what you can get around, where your head's gonna bonk, that sort of thing. And this tool exists, like I said, in Jack 1, 2, and 3, and it functions very much the same way. There's obviously a lot more going on in the debug menu that you can play around with and find cool things. But I think those are kind of the key things that I find useful for learning speedrun tech and practicing speedrun tech and that sort of thing. So let's go into the practice mod that we built for Jack 1, 2, and 3. So if you go to Features Mods, and you'll have to install this, you want to look for Speedrun Practice. And it looks like I'm out of date. I'm not going to update. I'll just run this version for now. So as you'll notice in the speedrun text here, you cannot submit runs of this mod. So this is meant just for practice. It has custom changes for extra displays and helper things that are not allowed for actual runs on the leaderboard. So people have made this mistake before. Don't be one of them. You can't do runs on this and then submit it. You have to run on the official version. This is just for practice. Okay. So I'm going to actually go ahead and reboot into debug mode on this. So a few different things are added in the practice mods. In Jack 1, I think it's only in Jack 1 where we've done this in the in-game menu. But if you go to game options, miscellaneous, there's a couple options here. Can show you like some information about idle deloads, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about in this video, but the information is there if you want to see it. So the plant deload option here, if you turn it on, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to show some information on the bottom left, and it's going to highlight the plant that you want to target to be able to do the deload trick. So you just want to come in, hit the plant, you know, come over here, do the thing. And if we did it right, it should deload. Yeah. The last option here is input display. This just adds like a in-game input display. So that can be cool, you know, if you want to show what inputs you're using in game, and you don't want to set up an external input display. It's kind of nice. But yeah, I think those are the only options that we've actually added to the in-game menus for the practice mod. All the other changes we've made are either in the speedrun menu or in the debug menu, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Let's start here with the speedrun menu. You have all the normal options from the vanilla game. You also have this way where you can jump to checkpoints. So this is if you weren't in debug mode, you can jump to any checkpoint in the game. That'll kind of useful. More interesting, I think, is the speedrun checkpoints. So these just set you up for some common things that you may want to practice for the speedrun. So for instance, like lava tube skip puts you right here, gives you 4 HP, and sets you up where you can just crouch and get the rocket uppercut right away. Or for instance, if you want to practice the scout fly boosted part of lava tube skip, we have an option for that. Let's see if I'm washed. Nice, not totally washed. One other thing that we've added that's kind of cool and nice and easy for resetting and practicing, you can hold L2 and press D-pad up, and you'll jump back to that checkpoint that you've selected. So this is useful. It'll reset you back to, you know, whatever checkpoint you've chosen from this menu. You can also set your own checkpoints. So if you hold L2 and press down, it'll set a checkpoint here. And then if I do L2 up, it's going to bring me to my custom checkpoint over here. Now, one thing with the custom checkpoints, they don't reset the world. So for instance, if you broke this fly crate and you reset to your checkpoint, it's still broken. Not great if you want to practice scout fly boosted and you don't want to use our built-in checkpoint for whatever reason, or other scenarios. You can hold L2 and R2 and press up, and it will actually reset the game, and then you can L2 up and go back to your normal checkpoint, and then you have the scout fly back. So yeah, that's custom checkpoints. L2 down to set one, L2 up to go back to it, hold R2 to reset the world while you do it. Now, also in the debug menu, if you go down to input displays, you can turn on and off the input display that we saw from the main in-game menu through this. Now, in addition to just the standard input display, Yopi's added this input card system, which I believe is based on a Super Smash Brothers tool. So it'll actually show like how many frames you're holding each button, how many frames you're not holding anything, that sort of thing. There's also a masher. So this will show you like how fast you're able to mash. Kind of useful for different things. And then under speedrun tools, we also have some options that you can do if you wanted like full blue eco, or if you want red eco, or if you want to give yourself nuke glitch, or if you want to give yourself zombie glitch. Yeah, just some shortcuts to do that, so you don't have to like go set these up in game. You can also turn on the idle deload and plant deload displays from here. Mountain pass race start. So if we jump to, no, not drunk cam, ogre race. So this shows a bubble for where the mountain pass trigger will actually start. It's a little hard to tell where it is, just the way the debug spheres render. We also have a tool for DMG abort triggers, so it'll show you where you'll actually fail the DMG race if you jump over the ledge. We have a speedometer that'll show you how fast you're moving. So this could be useful for figuring out what's the fastest way to move through a certain area. Citadel hops, we have a couple options here where it will show the invisible wall and show the trigger for a green sage. There's also an option here to show the FCS spider, as it's called. So this will show you like where the checks are happening for which way it wants to pull jack. And I didn't get a 3-frame jump, so it just keeps pulling me back the other way. But yeah, kind of get the idea. I think that's it for Jack 1. Let's jump to Jack 2. Okay, so then for the Jack 2 speedrun practice mod, same thing. You want to go to Jack 2, features mods, speedrun practice. Let's go ahead and boot it in debug mode. We have a similar system for custom checkpoints here. So you can do, instead of L2 down on the D-pad, it's R3 down. We'll set a custom checkpoint, and then R3 up will load you back to it. So set, reload. And then in the debug menu, there's a section here for speedrun tools. So you can set, you can give yourself either invuln 1 or invuln 2 or no invuln. There's also the similar input cards display, as well as, I think it's under display, input display, just the standard input display. And speedometer we saw before. Yeah, I think that's it. And then under speedrun tools, there's also a tombstones practice tool. So if we jump to tombstones, that sounds right. So if you want to practice learning the different tombstones patterns, you can use this. So you can have it either show you the pattern name, or you can have it show the pattern color. And so 7 low, whoops. Oh, I don't have jetboard, that's why this is weird. And then you could do like, I don't know the patterns. I'm not a Jack 2 runner, but you get the idea. This helps you like visualize where the patterns are. And then like you could set a checkpoint here and reload, and you're going to get a different pattern. I mean, you may not get a different pattern, but you can get a different pattern. And then you can also force a pattern. So if you wanted bottom mid, you can set that. Oh, did I choose the wrong one? Oh, 8 low. Yeah. If you wanted 8 low, you can force that, and then every time you spawn here, you'll get the 8 low one. So that can help you practice if, you know, so you want to practice the particular movement for that pattern. I think that's it in terms of speedrun tools here. One thing I'll call out with the custom checkpoints for Jack 2 and 3, it's not going to remember necessarily your progression through a mission. So I don't know, take like the escort sig through underport mission, right? If you set a save state in the middle of that mission and reload to it, it's not going to have sig following you. Sig's going to be back at the start of the mission. So just keep that in mind. It's not like a true save state. It's really just a custom checkpoint, and it's not really set up to fully map out mission progression, if that makes sense. That mostly just applies to Jack 2 and 3. One other mod I want to talk about in terms of practice, and it exists in Jack 2, but I'm going to bring it up in Jack 3. So you go to Features Mods, is this Individual Missions Speedruns mod. Now, this has its own separate leaderboards, and it's pretty fun to grind these individual missions and try to get really tight times on the short missions. But separate from that, I think there's some useful practice tools in here as well. So let's go ahead and boot in debug mode for this too, just so we can skip the title screen. So in the speedrun menu, again, it's the same as Jack 2 and Jack 1, L1, R1, and either start or select. You can choose individual missions that you want to run. So this can just be good for practicing individual missions. In particular, there's some stuff in Act 3 I want to talk about. So if you do level select, the vanilla level select, there is actually no difference between Terraformer and Final Boss. They're kind of combined into one mission, and you'll always have to play Terraformer to practice Final Boss. In this mod, I've split it up so you can just do Final Boss by itself. So that can be good for just practicing that. 2 missions I want to call out that I think have useful practice tools through the IL mod, individual missions mod, is also under Act 3. And it's these 2 with side mission storage, Palace Ruins and BTR. So, you know, as Naughty Dog intended, there's supposed to be enemies in this level, right? But in most of the speedruns nowadays, you'll get the side mission storage, one of the orb searches, and then you come into Palace Ruins and that side mission is still stored, and it makes it so the enemies don't load. And so you're really running the level more like this. That's kind of a lot to set up just to practice this. So it's kind of nice to have just a preset option that does the side mission storage for you. And then BTR is very much the same way. So, you know, you have normal BTR if you want to practice in the car for the old heads. But you also have the side mission storage version, so you can do it on the jet board like you would in most of the speedruns nowadays. Yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to talk about with the individual missions mod. Again, I'll just mention that it has separate leaderboards from the main OpenGOAL Jack 2 and 3 leaderboards. So, for instance, here you have the Jack 3 leaderboard. Let me zoom in a little bit. If you want to get to the individual missions one, you can go to this related tab, and you should see it here. And then you'll see, you know, we have individual missions levels for each mission. And then there's a similar one for Jack 2. And this is also linked from the Jack 2 OpenGOAL main page. So yeah, that's about it for the individual missions mod. All right, I think that's about it. This video is probably already way too long, and so kudos to you if you've actually sat through and listened to me blab all this time. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave comments. I also recommend joining the Discord, the Jack Speedruns Discord. I'll put a link in the video description for that. The community's always really helpful. You know, when people have questions, that, you know, people will take the time to walk you through things. They'll ask you to post videos of what you've been attempting and try to critique what you're doing and help you get on the right track. So yeah, if you're struggling, I definitely recommend joining the Discord. It's super helpful. There's a ton of information in there and people willing to guide you along the way. Yeah, and I think that's it. Thanks. Have fun.